conditional mapping, and that's the first new feature from here that we're going to be sharing today. So for conditional mapping, it lets us use different value mapping or value transformations depending on the value of another field synced in the entity. Some use cases that we're supporting here are being able to support different status values for different projects that are included in the automation, or picking a different LLM prompt to run in the concatenation depending on another flag. So for example, we know that customers don't want to run their assessment every time that anyone makes any change to a description unless it's a substantive change. And so we can, for example, set a condition on a flag or some other field to say, hey, only do the LLM processing when the item has reached a certain state. Otherwise, you can just forward something like pending LLM assessment as a string. And then you see our list of supported adapters. I'll talk through the details here. So how this works, we can add alternate value mappings or concatenation definitions. We assess the criteria. If there are multiple criteria rules that could match, we do assess them in order and use the first criteria rule that matches the conditions of the item. Reordering this is drag and drop in the value mapping. And then if none of the rules match, we use the kind of basic value mapping that has been set before any conditions were added. You define the condition criteria based on any available fields for the adapter. There are a couple of restrictions for field types or individual fields that just don't make sense for criteria, particularly things like system fields. And it's configurable whether a criteria needs to match all of the rules or any of the rules, and I'll show you what that logic looks like in a minute. And then you do have to set these criteria separately for each direction in a two-way automation. The reason for this is that we do have to assess the criteria based on the payload of the synced item. We can't base it off the value of a destination field. So for example, if we're talking about, hey, do this by project, you do need to set the project on both sides as condition criteria. We have operators for equals or does not equal, matches any, matches all, matches none, and an empty or is not empty. And then sync for the field occurs when any of the mapped fields or any of the criteria fields are updated. The reason for this being that if you have a different mapping depending on your criteria field update, we do need to reassess and then resync the field based on the criteria field update. When assessed for conflict comparison, where there's a conditional involved, we first assess which side should win the conflict, and then uses the value from the field for the source that wins the conflict to determine which condition to apply. This gets very weird if one of your condition criteria goes through a field transformation. And so there are some warnings that pop up. For example, if you have a criteria field set as a field that is updated by an LLM processing, we may no longer have in the payload the original value because we've replaced it with the processed value depending on the order of comparison. And so we warn and say, hey, your criteria field is using something that's a destination of an LLM. We're going to warn against this. You should not use that as a criteria field. We also made some changes to the value mapping based on the conditional mapping updates to the UI. The export and import mapping applies to the mapping table per condition, not to the full set of conditions. That should be clear in the UI here. Remove all mappings now does remove the value mappings for all conditions and all of the condition rules. If you want to remove a single condition, there's a delete button on the condition that removes just that condition and its mappings. But we really remove all means remove all across all mappings there. And then we did update the value mapping validation and automation save validation to account for how conditions impact both of those things. And while we were doing it, made some improvements to the user experience as well. So now any warnings about things that are not allowed are presented on the page rather than in a dialogue if possible. So whenever possible, that's the approach we've taken. And those pop up before any dialogues pop up. So you have to clear your flag-based warnings before you get to any dialogues. And then warning dialogues that require remediation before you are allowed to save uh, happen in a first round so that you have to remediate that before you can get to further options. And then the message about required fields being unmapped has been removed entirely. This message basically popped up every time you tried to save any automation, making it kind of meaningless noise. We had thought about ways to improve this, but it would have required pretty extensive per adapter implementation. So the decision was made just to remove this warning. And then the prompt to ask if you want to activate your automation only appears if there is a valid license. So you won't get this case where it says, "Hey, do you want to activate the automation?" And you say, "Why, yes, I would." And it says, "Nope, too bad." You also won't get that prompt or any of the prompts to skip if there are blocking validation errors that occur. And this came from the feedback that we got that, hey, there's a lot of pop-ups, a lot of dialogues that you have to click through when you save an automation, and it's very frustrating to go through those only to be told that you can't save the automation anyway. We've put some tighter ordering around what appears when through that validation. So let's look at the conditional mapping itself. And I will open up this automation here that I have pre-configured. The case that I'm going to show here is when we have different status workflows for different projects. So in this case, I have a multi-project automation. Oh, this should have two projects, but I'll add that other project as we go. We've got our project mapping, and then our status mapping is a pretty standard status mapping between Jira status and Rally schedule state. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the template project from the multivariate one to this, and I will reload my field mappings. And what we can see here in the value mapping is that these values are not valid for this project. So you see a different set of values here. So I am not, in fact, going to update those. I am going to add a condition. And this is what the condition dialog looks like. So I will add a rule, and I will say if the project is equal to this Chaz demo project, we're going to use a different value mapping. We would also add a mapping on the Rally side, also to project. And so that, like I said, this does need to be defined separately on each side because it is based on the payload of the item that we're pulling in. We can't base it off of destination values. So here you have a two-way rule that says if it's this project or that other project that it maps to, then make it a two-way sync. So for my value mapping, I now have a different set of values here, which I can map. And now we have two separate mappings. And I can also name the condition. So for example, if you say this is the alternate workflow mapping, that means it is very easy to see in my overall field mapping. Oh, I have my alternate workflow mapping, and then I have my default mapping down here. I said that you could add multiple conditions. So let me add another one. So I can add condition 2 here, and I'll call this uh, alternate 2. And I could create yet another set. But then if I realize that, oh, wait, I have a wider set of projects that are going to fall into alternate 2 than alternate 1, I want to define my rules so that we assess this one first. This is drag and drop that I can move up my condition. And then when ConnectALL is assessing the rules, it will pick the first condition that matches and then apply the default mapping when no other conditions match. I can delete this for now. Actually, let me show you some of the validation here. So it says map includes values. This is the not allowed in the project, so I can save that. That's fine. And here we see the flag where it says it has validation errors. I'll open up this condition. The error is that there's no criteria. So I'll delete this, then save the mapping. And I just found an issue with that validation dialog, and then I can save this mapping overall. Um, so here's the value mismatches is just because the template project is different than the values of the project selected. We are in the future going to look at a dynamic template project so that we can pick different template projects per condition. That is not something that we have completed yet. I'm not going to save this at the moment I'll continue to use this automation. Similarly, we could do this with a concatenation or with an LLM prompt. So for example, I can switch to the value transformation and I could define my prompt based on the description. But if I want to add a condition, I could say something like the default will be no assessment, and then have the description. And then if I want to add a condition, I could say, I have the flag set up for this one. No, ready. Let me do it from the rally side just because I have for example, take ready when ready equals yes, because it's a Boolean, or rather true. I could then configure LLM processing for that ready item only when it is ready, for example. And that lets us put smart filtering on when to run LLM processing. One other thing that I mentioned but didn't show was the any versus all. So you can add multiple rules on different fields. And the any versus all is a simple logical operator saying if any one is a match or if all of these are a match. And that's to allow us to define additional projects. So you could say, hey, if it's any of these three projects, match it. Obviously, you wouldn't do an all in that case because a project can only have a single value, and validation will tell you, hey, you have multiple fields with an equals operator. This condition is going to fail, and it won't let you save it. But when you switch it to any with multiple fields, it'll allow you to pick multiple values. Where instead of needing to define the field multiple times with a field equals and then this will become a selection list, so you can pick multiple items from that dropdown.